Okay, I think we're live here. Somebody can let me know. That would be great. Hey, Cage. Me and my tech skills. I haven't streamed in a long time. Many things have happened. Hello, Lynn. Am I okay on the audio here? 6 of you in here. Great. Howdy, howdy. Long time. Long time. How'd little dog? 5x5. Great. Okay. Oh, she just came in the room. Hello. Hello. Okay. So I played you a couple of clips. This story is a very long and involved story. Very long and involved. So what we're going to do, I've been, and it's hard for me. Okay, so we're going to go to an article. So this is out of the Daily Mail from September 2nd, 2016. An ex-pupil suicide, a torrent of allegations, and the haunting question: did one of our top public schools turn a blind eye to stories of abuse for years? Paul Shepard, now 53, taught at the £33,000 a year Ampleforth College. I'd like to know your guys' observations, those of you who have watched the two videos that I put up there earlier, what you thought. Mr. Shepard taught science there for 3 months in the summer of 1989. He was cleared of indecently assaulting a boy, 10, while at Ampleforth. Another pupil, James Glynn, killed himself in 2013, age 35. So there's RC-A60. It's James Glynn. There he is there. Sitting in the staff room in his native Canada, one February afternoon, Paul Shepard came across an advert in a magazine for a job as a maths teacher in the Dominican Republic. Quote, I ponder the options. And quote, he would later recall, quote, remain in Canada with minus 30 degrees Celsius and 2 meters of snow, or head to the Dominican Republic with plus 30 degrees Celsius, endless miles of sandy beaches. Needless to say, the decision was simple. I packed for the Dominican Republic, and the rest, as they say, is history, end quote. And what a colorful, action-packed history it would prove to be. Over the next 2 decades, the divorced father of one would take up posts in South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Cameroon, Congo, and China. Yes, his name is James Glynn. That's RC-A60. There he is there as a boy. High Pioneer, Nova Scotia 44. So you can see a lot of schools, right? And from being a lowly teacher, he rose to headmaster and then beyond, becoming a school director and a doctor of education. But within his colorful CV, there is scant mention of his first foray abroad to Britain's £33,000 a year Ampleforth College. This is one of Britain's top schools, Catholic school. It's the Eton, Catholic Eton. The most prestigious establishment at which he had ever taught. Tara, howdy. Good to have you here. Founded and run by the Benedictine monks of Ampleforth Abbey, its former pupils include ex-England rugby star Lawrence Dallagallio, Downton Abbey creator Julian Fellows, actor Rupert Everett, and the sculptor Anthony Gromley. Oh, so okay, something's going on there. Getting an attack or something. That's nice. Dr. Shepard, many other famous alumni. Dr. Shepard, who is now 53, again, keeping in mind that this is 2016, right? Dr. Shepard, who is now 53, taught science there at Ampleforth for 3 months in the summer of 1989. Summer 1989. This is a critical time. And when he left, he did so with what appeared to be the ringing endorsement of the headmaster, Father Dominic Milroy. His job references praised his, quote, exceptional dedication, quote, high level of idealism, end quote, and pastoral care that, quote, much valued by children and parents alike, end quote. Today, a very different picture of Dr. Shepard's time teaching in England has emerged. Last year, he was found not guilty of indecently assaulting a 10-year-old boy while at Ampleforth. Now, following an investigation by the Times, the London Times, it is claimed that the school failed to properly investigate the allegations that he had assaulted multiple pupils during his brief stay. Those pupils believed that they were badly let down by the school, which knew of the allegations at the time, but did not inform the authorities. They are also concerned about the handling of the recent trial. Dr. Shepard, who denied any wrongdoing, had been due to face 7 charges of indecent assault against 5 former pupils, but following rulings by the judge, in the end, only 1 ever took the stand. There's Dr. Shepard. And what has also emerged are details of Dr. Shepard's original arrest in 2014. He was stopped at Heathrow's airport on suspicion of serious sexual offenses against another Ampleforth pupil, James Glynn. Mr. Glynn committed suicide in 2013 at the age of 35. Following his death, his relatives and friends vowed to fight for justice for him, their efforts ultimately leading to the trial over allegations made by another pupil. So the initial allegations came from Mr. Glynn, who committed suicide. With more former pupils coming forward with fresh allegations in recent days, There are growing calls for North Yorkshire police to reopen their investigation. Quote, "We feel that the previous trial was a travesty," end quote, said one former pupil, "but we are not prepared to give up." Back in June 1989, Ampleforth was abuzz with talk of their charismatic new science teacher. Howdy, Stella. His real lights. Welcome. At 26, not only was he young, but he would regale pupils with exciting stories of his past life. He had briefly served in the Canadian Air Force, and bedtime stories told in the dormitories of Junior House, home to boys aged 10 to 13, featured tales of his daring do. Quote, "We liked him a lot," end quote, one said. Quote, "He introduced rounders game to the boys who didn't play cricket. He was a charismatic teacher," end quote. Rounders is a English boarding school game. Not very popular over here. Then rumors began to spread about more worrying behavior. A member of staff heard about it and informed the headmaster, Father Milroy. In the end, 11 boys would be summoned to see the head, Father Milroy, outlining the behavior that they felt was inappropriate. This included, they claimed, indecent incidents of kissing, stroking, and hugging. Hello, Quest. 11 boys were called to see Father Dominic Milroy. He interviewed the 11 boys. He stopped at 11. I'll just add that fact. He didn't go any further. And so it was that he returned to Canada before embarking on a career that over the next 25 years would see him teach at institutions in far-flung corners of the world. Over that time, Ampleforth would find itself beset by a number of accusations of historic child abuse. Since 1996, 3 monks and a lay teacher have been convicted of sex offenses against more than 30 pupils from the mid-60s to the mid-90s. In 1996, Father Bernard Green, 43, was given 2 years probation and 50 hours community service for indecent assault of a pupil of 13. 2005, Father Gregory Carroll, 66, was jailed for 4 years after pleading guilty to abusing 10 boys between 1979 and 87. That same year, Father Piers Grant Ferris got 2 years for 20 indecent assaults against 15 pupils at Ampleforth's prep school over a 9-year period. I could get into who these people are, and I will, but they're interesting. Last year, former English teacher David Lowe, 61, was jailed for 10 years for 15 offenses against 10 boys, aged 8 to 13. 4 of the victims came from Ampleforth and the rest from Westminster Cathedral Choir School. 2 years probation, is that what you're referring to? Some people get heavy jail sentences and some don't. But the catalyst for the investigation into Dr. Shepard would come in 2013 with the tragic suicide of former pupil James Glynn. God rest his soul. Born to British parents living in Hong Kong. He was following in his father's footsteps when he joined Ampleforth in 1988. It was to prove a deeply unhappy experience. That means that his father is an Ampleforthian, is the way that they refer to that. He's an old boy. Now, there's a culture within boarding schools. And those who haven't been to boarding schools may not know these things. But it's a very insular community. Very. So to turn on your school is both very hard because you have a lot of people who are very powerful in places, and it's a culture. I don't like using that word, but it is a culture. Yes, culture. So to turn against your school as an old Ampleforthian is very hard. Yet his father did it. His father was a lawyer out of Hong Kong. He wanted to do well and make his parents proud. His elder sister, Emma Glynn, told me this week. He was very homesick and was bullied. We were very close, and I was very much aware of his unhappiness at school. After leaving the school at 18, James struggled to get on with his life. He needed treatment for drug addiction and could not settle into a job. On Boxing Day 2006, keeping in mind some of the things that in those videos from before, right? He and Emma sat down for a heart-to-heart about where his life was heading. Quote, I said that a lot of people get bullied at school and go on to have very happy lives. And that is how the whole conversation started. Quote, she said, quote, I asked him if there was anything else holding him back. His sister says that James then claimed that at the age of 11, that he had been sexually assaulted on more than one occasion at the school. When she asked if it had been an older boy, he is said to have replied, quote, no, Em, it was Mr. Shepard. So, Emma Glynn knows Mr. Shepard. Although she would tell her father, a lawyer, of her brother's claims, James was adamant he did not want to involve the authorities. He was in the middle of doing his master's degree, and things were relatively positive. We just didn't want to rock the boat, she says. But after James took his own life in 2013, the subject was raised at his funeral, which was attended by his contemporaries from Ampleforth. They remembered Dr. Shepard well, then Mr. Shepard, and the circumstances of his departure from the school. Quote, it was the biggest thing that had happened to us that year, end quote, said one former pupil. Quote, it was a big scandal, end quote. The family contacted North Yorkshire Police, who interviewed 11 former pupils. 8 described incidents of alleged, quote, inappropriate touching by Dr. Shepard. When in December 2014, Dr. Shepard flew into Britain from Kuwait, where he was working for a holiday. He was arrested at Heathrow on suspicion of serious sex offenses against James Glynn. However, he was never charged. The Crown Prosecution Services ruled that since the case was 25 years old and the sole witness was dead, there was no realistic prospect of conviction. However, it did decide that there was a case for Dr. Shepard to answer to over the alleged incidents involving James' former fellow pupils. And he was charged with 4 counts of indecent assault against 3 boys. By the opening day of his trial at York Crown Court last September, he faced 7 indecent assault charges involving 5 former pupils. But before the jury was sworn in, the judge ruled that the physical contact alleged by 4 of the 5 ex-pupils did not meet the legal definition of indecent. They included allegations that the teacher had stroked and kissed an 11-year-old boy as he slept and pinned another 11-year-old boy on the ground by his wrists while straddling him. The ruling surprised police and prosecutors, who had argued that a jury might have decided that each of the original charges involved indecent contact with the context of teacher-pupil relationship. All 4 men have been left feeling cheated and of a chance to have their claims heard in court. One former pupil whose claims were put to the jury was not one of the 11 boys summoned to the headmaster in 1989. So the evidence presented to the jury was limited. Now you're up to 12. For a summer. And that was all that was interviewed. During this trial, the ex-pupil alleged, to the best of my knowledge, aged 10, he was indecently assaulted by Dr. Shepard on 2 occasions in the school's buildings. He claimed the assaults were as a, quote, punishment, end quote, for trivial misdemeanors. Each time the science teacher told him to take down his trousers or pajamas and spanked him, as well as touching him indecently, the former pupil claimed. Quote, I was very uncomfortable at the time, he said, in the witness box at York Crown Court. Quote, I was naked. It felt very unusual and very exposed, end quote. Quote, I think the fact that I was touched made it even more uncomfortable. Under cross-examination, he said that the indecent touching may have been accidental on the first occasion, but he believed that it was not. At the end of the prosecution's case, the judge told the jury to find Dr. Shepard not guilty of that charge, as there was insufficient evidence. In his defense, Dr. Shepard told the court he did not remember the alleged incident. He admitted punishing pupils in the same way that he was disciplined as a child, by spanking. When he was asked about the assault and if he recognized the claimant, Dr. Shepard said his recollection was vague, given that it was more than 2 decades since he had last seen him. Quote, I do not remember doing this, he said. Quote, I would never have asked them to remove their trousers or underpants. Quote, I accept it's possible that I could have administered corporal punishment, but I did when I was there, because I did when I was there. Ampleforth College had no policy as to the regards to it, but it was my understanding that it was in common use. I witnessed more than one member of staff doing it on another occasion. I witnessed another staff member. Okay. So he's there, he's fresh, and he's spanking boys. Okay. Among the evidence given on his behalf was a character reference by Dr. Fradsham, a Canadian who attended St. John's School, a boarding school near Stony Plain, Alberta, where Dr. Shepard rose to become headmaster in 2000. He said he had received corporal punishment from Dr. Shepard by being spanked with a wooden paddle. He said Dr. Shepard was a, quote, very good teacher, very fair, end quote, who followed proper procedures in giving corporal punishment, and never did anything improper or sexual towards pupils. When Dr. Shepard was cleared by the jury of the one remaining charge, he wept with relief. It was understood that since he has since returned to Canada, and attempts to contact him by this newspaper proved unsuccessful. The pupil who gave evidence has since spoken out about how badly he feels. Quote, I agreed to give a police statement about what happened to me in support of what I thought was a much bigger prosecution, he told the Times. Instead, I found myself in the witness box in a trial where the only charges were related to me. I was told I must not make any reference to any other complaint that was not allowed to say why Mr. Shepard suddenly vanished from the school. Other former pupils told the Mail that they accept that if the jury had heard all the facts, they may still have cleared Dr. Shepard, but they said that they would at least have felt justice had been served. Now, 4 new witnesses to alleged incidents involving Dr. Shepard have come forward. Lisa Winward, North Yorkshire's Assistant Chief Constable, has said that it was, quote, hugely disappointing, end quote, that not all of the allegations were heard in court. She says officers will investigate any new material. That promise comes on top of the revelation yesterday that the force is also conducting a criminal investigation into Right Reverend Cuthbert Madden, the most senior figure at Ampleforth. He denies wrongdoing. With regards to, and Cuthbert was one of the men who gave testimony there, but it might not be quite as it appears. Might not. With regards to the allegations relating to Dr. Shepard, a spokesman from Ampleforth College said Father Milroy, who was the headmaster, had properly investigated them at the time. The 11 boys that at the time disclosed to him that they were indecently assaulted. 1989. And what did they do? Father Milroy and a senior housemaster gave glowing letters of reference. Did not report to police. And not only did they not do that, they gave him glowing letters of reference so he could teach elsewhere. These investigations, quote, did not yield allegations of sexual impropriety, a statement said from Ampleforth. Quote, Shepard left at the end of July 1989 when his supply contract ended. The decision to leave was mutual. A reference supplied by the school at the time reflected his performance as a supply teacher during the short time at the school, end quote. The school, it said, had fully cooperated with police investigations. Now, one moment, I'm trying to think here where we should go. So we have Ampleforth saying, this is part of Ampleforth's official statement, that he was dismissed, or sorry, not dismissed, it was just a mutual parting. He was just there for a temporary period of time, and that the investigations by the headmaster Milroy, the 11 boys, had yielded nothing. Is that in fact so? All right, let's have a look. Just wait a moment here. This is going to do this. Right. I can only do this probably one place. Okay. Okay. Andrew Norfolk. Times. I would like to talk to him. Former pupils can't see justice, natural justice in judges' rulings. August 25th, 2016. Okay, so just, I think, a day before the other article. Paul Shepard was acquitted. The sole charge of indecent assault on the jury was asked to reach a verdict. To convict the former Ampleforth College teacher, members of the jury were told that they must be sure of his guilt. On the basis of the evidence presented to them, their verdict was entirely reasonable. The case was they were asked to consider, however, a skeletal shadow of its intended prosecution. Remember, 4 boys came forward afterward, too. So you had the 5 initial ones, then you had 4. There's a lot we're talking about here. The case they were asked to consider was, however, a skeletal shadow of the intended prosecution. Following legal submissions, including the defense's complaints that failings by the Crown Prosecution Service, Judge Colin Byrne made rulings that reduced a trial in which Dr. Shepard was due to face 7 charges of indecently assaulting 5 boys to 1 that featured a sole complainant. The prosecution thus lost the capacity to present evidence that would, they believe, have indicated a pattern of inappropriate behavior. Another consequence was the disappearance from the case of any reference made by any of the complainants about the teacher that were made by young pupils during the 3 months he spent at Ampleforth 1989. Those allegations were that Dr. Shepard touching children in a way that no teacher should touch a pupil. They led directly to the headmaster's decision. To terminate his contract. Dr. Shepard denied any such misconduct. The former pupils who remember the drama that gripped the school towards the end of the term contacted the Times because they felt that they were being denied justice. When the newspaper asked the court for a transcript of the two testimonials, Judge Colin Byrne made little attempt to disguise his discomfort. He questioned our motivation, voiced concern for the likely impact of the elderly monks who wrote them, meaning the letters of recommendation. In 1989, the school's headmaster and a senior housemaster spoke darkly of the dangers of trial by public, quote unquote. The Times sought those references because, although the jury was entirely unaware of this, they were evidence in the way which Ampleforth washed its hands of a teacher accused of touching young boys inappropriately. They described Dr. Shepard as exceptionally dedicated in his care for children. As the judge acknowledged, their aim was to recommend him, quote, as a suitable person to continue with teaching appointments. Judge Byrne, 53, a former soldier and barrister, who was appointed to sit as a circuit judge in 2012. I think all of these details have bearing, felt that it was not be, quote, appropriate in natural justice, and, quote, to order the testimonial's disclosure if one of the newspaper's aims was, quote, to investigate the motives of behavior, end quote, of the school authorities. One of the references was written by Father Dominic Milroy, who was then headmaster, now aged 84. This is important. He told police last year that he asked Dr. Shepard to leave the school as a direct consequence of the boys' complaints about him touching them. It is directly contrary to the Ampleforth statement. Saying, oh, he just left on his own accord. It was just done. No. Father Dominic Milroy, then headmaster, who investigated the 11 boys and gave the letters of some of the glowing letters of recommendation so that Shepard could go on and teach, admitted to police in 2014 that he had asked Dr. Shepard to leave as a direct result of his investigation. Which Ampleforth said, no, he never found anything. Okay. A parent recalls another senior monk telling her at the start of the following term that Dr. Shepard, quote, had to go, end quote, because he, quote, behaved inappropriately with some of the boys, end quote, and kissed one of them. Now that's two admissions. One's from a parent in 1989, and the other's from the headmaster of the school. important. The job references were read to the jury by Dr. Shepard's defense counsel. Under criminal practice directions, the Times was entitled to a copy of them. After the trial, copies were provided to the newspaper by his defense team. Too often, criminal trials are held at which judges and lawyers risk no public scrutiny or criticism because there is no media presence to observe the proceedings. Entering a court sometimes feels like walking into a private members' club. Lord Justice Tolson said in 2012, the principle of open justice was vital to the rule of law. It was a safeguard against judicial bias, unfairness, incompetence, and ensured that judges were accountable. Judge Colin Byrne surprised the police and a senior lawyer at the Crown Prosecution Service with his rulings. His interpretation of what constituted indecent conduct, may have been correct in law, but made no sense to the men, aged 10 to 13, aged in 1989, who said that they remembered what happened. To borrow the judge's words, to them it did not seem, quote, appropriate natural justice that, end quote, that a jury was asked to consider Shepard's case without knowing why the teacher was asked to leave Ampleforth. Now, I want you to kind of put yourself, guys can easily do this one, right? Or somewhat easily. Put themselves into these men's shoes. The boys. They come from extremely affluent families. And they're coming forward and they're saying something bad was going down. Not easy for guys to do at all. Against their old school, against their teacher. Obviously, they're men. People ask questions then, start to think things. There's a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. And yet, they came forward. James Glynn, well, he killed himself before those charges, the initial charges, could be brought. All right, now, where do we go? Why don't we do this one? Gazette Herald, UK. Sex accused is backed by judge. September 2015. A judge and a doctor have praised a former teacher accused of indecently assaulting a pupil by spanking him at Ampleforth. The father and son, both called Alan Fradsham, gave evidence through a video link from Canada, where they both live and work, to a jury at York Crown Court during the trial of Dr. Shepard. Canadian-born science teacher Shepard, now 52, this is a year earlier, living at Graham Road, Purley, Surrey, denies indecently assaulting a 10-year-old first-year pupil at Ampleforth College when he was teaching there in the late 80s. At the end of the prosecution's case, Judge Colin Byrne directed the jury to acquit Shepard of a second similar charge. York Crown Court heard that Mr. Shepard, Shepard, was later headmaster, also taught at St. John's School, a boarding school in Stony Plain, Alberta, Canada, became principal in 1998 and headmaster in 2000. Giving character references for the defense, Dr. Alan Fradsham, who specializes in Chinese medicine, said that he had been a pupil at the Canadian boarding school in his mid-teens, where he received corporal punishment from Shepard by being spanked with a wooden paddle. He said Shepard was a very good teacher, very fair, who followed proper procedures in giving corporal punishment and never did anything improper or sexual towards pupils. I don't know how he would necessarily know that, but he certainly can attest to his own. His father, Judge Alan Fradsham, a full-time judge specializing in criminal law in Calgary, Alberta, said Shepard cared for his pupils, and after seeing how his son Alan was treated, he sent his second son to the same school. So we have a provincial court judge from Alberta giving testimony on behalf of Dr. Shepard in his 2015 trial. Okay, invoking definitely his title as a judge. After his sons left, he joined the school's advisory board. Judge Fradsham sat on the board of St. John's School of Alberta. Of Shepard, he said, quote, "All I've heard from anyone about him was positive. All the comments were consistent with the view that I have formed that he was an exceptional teacher and a benefit to the school. Other former pupils and work colleagues also gave character reference." The trial continues. Love to see those. Okay, now, where do we want to go here? Sorry, one moment. Purley Road. Okay. One moment, please. Definitely more in Ampleforth I can deal with. Lots of things delisted. Very interesting. That's fine. Okay, where did that go now? There we go. Oh, is that how I do that? One moment, sorry. Six years for teacher who sexually abused student at Edmonton area boys' school in the 1990s. A former teacher and headmaster of now defunct Edmonton area boys' school has been sentenced to 6 years in prison for sexually abusing a student in the early 1990s. Paul Shepard, 58, was convicted of 3 sex crimes after a jury in Wetaskiwin earlier this year. He was once a teacher at St. John's School of Alberta, an elite all-male boarding school located in North Saskatchewan River in Stony Plain. Shepard spent his career teaching at boarding schools around the world, including the United Kingdom, where he faced similar charges. Allegations. My apologies. He was acquitted of the one sole complainant, right, that was left. Following a week-long trial in Alberta, an Alberta jury found that Shepard guilty of sexually abusing Stacey Easton. In 1993-94, St. John's school year, when Easton was in grade 7. Easton, who uses they, them pronouns, is now 40 and a writer in Hamilton. They took the rare step of having the court remove a publication ban on their name. Such bans are imposed in nearly all sexual abuse cases to protect the privacy of the complainants. Okay. But Easton hoped sharing their story would combat the stigma of being an abuse victim and encourage other victims to come forward. I have a really complex and nuanced view of what happened, and I think more information is better than less information, Easton said of the ban. School known for physical discipline. St. John's was founded in 1968 by an Anglican lay order called the Company of the Cross. Among its founding members was Ted Byfield, longtime journalist and publisher of the Alberta Report. Not sure if those of you who are familiar with Alberta Report or Ted Byfield or Western Report or Ted Byfield's many political connections. St. John's prided itself on academics, faith, and discipline, and emphasized corporal punishment. It regularly advertised its outdoor programs, including grueling snowshoe races and excursions in which students and instructors swamped a canoe in North Saskatchewan during the spring thaw. Okay. The school closed in 2008 after a steady decline of enrollments. According to an investigation by UK's Daily Mail, Shepard taught at elite schools in numerous countries, including England's Ampleforth College. In 2015, he was found not guilty of indecently assaulting one boy a 10-year-old boy, attended the school where he briefly taught in 1989. I probably should have read one other article here, but maybe we can go to that. Shepard later landed at St. John's, where he became a headmaster. During the 93-94 school year, Shepard taught at the school and served as a, quote, duty master, grade 7 class. The role included inflicting corporal punishment on students, including spankings, in his private office. Easton, who was 12 when the abuse began, testified that their family placed them in the school because of its tough reputation. They were bullied and had trouble fitting in with other classmates. Eventually, Shepard took an interest in them, taking them into the duty master's office for what the Crown called a, quote, cycle, in quote, of corporal punishment and sexual abuse. Easton testified the abuse occurred 10 to 12 times during the school year, including in the woods outside the school. Shepard denied any abuse had occurred. So, first we were in England with multiple boys over a summer, which then got reduced to one, and he was eventually charged in 2015. And now we have another case. We have a provincial court judge helping out over there. Okay. Easton testified the abuse occurred. Easton went to police in 1999 and 2007. But it wasn't until 2019 that Shepard was charged. His trial in the Court of Queen's Bench began March 22nd. March 30th, after around 9 hours of deliberation, the jurors convicted him on all 3 charges, including sexual interference, sexual contact with a child, and sexual counseling of a child. Former judge amongst the teacher supporters. Shepard faced up to 10 years in jail for the crimes. During the sentencing hearing Friday, he sat alone with his arms covered, wearing a 3-piece suit and a red tie. He declined to address the court. Court heard Shepard had 5 advanced degrees, including a doctorate, and lives in St. Catharines with his partner. He is now semi-retired, or he is semi-retired. This is 2021. Brian Barish, that name is eerily familiar. You guys remember Brian Barish? Interesting, his name comes up. Shepard's lawyer argued for 2 years in jail, followed by a brief period of probation. He cited a psychosexual evaluation that found Shepard was a low risk to reoffend. He urged Justice Deborah Youngsworth to find that it was the only instance, one instance of sexual abuse, in fact, had occurred. So it's kind of stipulating almost. Shepard submitted 16 letters from supporters, among them a provincial court judge, Alan Fradsham. Oh, I missed that part there. What was that? Hold on a moment. Wasn't he over here in 2015 also coming to his defense in England? Now here he is in 2021 doing the same thing. Oh, sorry. So here in 2021, why is it doing that? One moment. Here in 2015 in the UK, right? And then here again, in Alberta, 2021. And he sat on the board. And he said, I don't know, does that article say he said once on there? Fradsham told the court he has known the former teacher for 25 years and believes his conduct is out of character. Crown prosecutor Drew Gillespie argued Shepard's crimes deserved 6 to 8 years in prison. He said there were no mitigating circumstances that argued for a shorter sentence, and Youngworth, my apologies, should impose a sentence that denounces and deters child sexual abuse. Youngworth has accepted the proposed 6-year sentence. Shepard has been on bail for 2 years and only has a few weeks of credit pre-trial custody. Easton, however, did not think sending Shepard to prison where offenders face constant threat of violence was a just outcome. Quote, St. John's believed deeply in the idea of violent correction and to control bodies. I reject those lessons, and I think that sending Dr. Shepard to prison will reinforce legitimacy of them, end quote. He said in a victim impact statement, I want to unlearn the lessons of St. John's. Okay. Now, I want to see if I can get that. I'm going to flash back here. I should have probably done that then. Is this the one I want? That'll probably work. I'm going to go back in time again. BBC. Ampleforth College. Police investigate bungled abuse probe claims. A police force is investigating claims by the Times that it bungled an inquiry into alleged sex abuse at the school. It centers around the case Paul Shepard, 1989. The Times says that North Yorkshire police failed to speak to 2 ex-pupils whose accounts had led to Dr. Shepard being questioned about another child's sex offenses. He denies any wrongdoing. The force asked the newspaper for details of the 2 former pupils. So North Yorkshire doesn't know who these 2 former pupils are. The Times also says former pupils who were told at the 11th hour that they would not be giving evidence against Dr. Shepard were falsely assured by police that they were not required in court because their written statements had been accepted by the defense. That explanation was not true, the paper says. While the former pupils claim that the case was conducted by police, by police and the prosecution was, quote, shambolic, end quote. So they were told to issue, not come to court. And then their charges got tossed. And then Judge Colin Byrne kicked another one. And he kicked one right off the bat. So then you're left with 1. And then the police force is looking for witnesses that they already know. Do you smell something stinky going on here? in 2 continents. It gets a lot more interesting, though. 16 letters of reference. Remember that. 16 letters of reference. The explanation was not true. The paper says, okay, it's shambolic. Commenting to the Times, the report, North Yorkshire Police Assistant Chief Constable Lisa Winward says, quote, this complex investigation spanned 2 years. And despite considerable police efforts to present strong case on a number of allegations to the CPS, it was hugely disappointing that not all these were heard in court. Why did they say don't show up? She urged the 2 former pupils who have information to come forward and speak to police. Until we know who they are, it isn't possible to confirm whether or not they were known to the investigation at the time. If offenses have been committed, again, involving other former pupils, well, there seems to be a whole trove. And one is dead, the very first one. And then the other case, eventually when it does get pursued, because they say, well, we can't do anything about it because he died. Then they say, oh, okay, well, now we've got 5. Then they start kicking them until it's one boy sitting up there. He said, she said, he said, with all these letters of reference, including a provincial court judge from Alberta who sat on the board at the school, which then another student came forward from that school and said, and there was a finding of guilt in 2021. Now, in the second case, to which that judge again said, oh, no. Oh, he's taught on more than 2 continents. He's taught at 4 continents that I'm aware of. Until we know who they are, it's not possible to confirm whether or not they were known to the investigation at the time. Ms. Winward added, if the offenses have been involved other students, we will investigate them thoroughly. If there is evidence to consider new matters to investigate, then we will do so. In relation to the allegation that witnesses were misled when they were advised that they were no longer required to attend court, why would witnesses not be allowed to attend court? And who would have said? The defense has accepted those. We have launched an internal investigation to establish who spoke to the witnesses regarding their statements. Our investigation will look at the timeline of court proceedings and what was said in order to establish whether they had been intentionally misled. The newspaper has reported. Ampleforth College said in the statement that the Times that the headmaster at the time, Dominic Milroy, had investigated the pupils' allegations in 1989, but concluded they did not amount to sexual impropriety. Already, we know that not to be true. Dr. Shepard did not respond to any questions. Okay. Both of which schools have closed. Ampleforth most certainly has not closed. Now, one moment. Why is it that I'm having difficulties finding? Oh, okay. Here we go. Now this is a bit more of a read. Hidden curriculum, a headmaster's sexual abuse conviction, and the legacies of an Alberta boys' school. Paul Shepard was convicted last year of sexually abusing a student in now defunct St. John's School of Alberta, years after being acquitted of similar charges in the United Kingdom. December 2nd, 2022. Paul Shepard convicted last year. Okay. Johnny Wakefield investigates Shepard's past and what his conviction tells us about the legacy of his once storied boys' school. As a student at St. John's School of Alberta, Stacey Easton came to know the types of fear: the dull ache of being away from home, the stomach-churning dread at the approach of bully, barely contained in the panic before a canoe capsizes into a freezing river. But the unease Easton felt towards Paul Shepard fell into a category all of its own. Excuse the expletive, but he scared the shit out of me, Easton told the Alberta courtroom last year. Scared was relative at St. John's, a defunct boarding school on the North Saskatchewan River near Edmonton, once billed as one of the toughest schools in North America. It's actually the toughest, but okay, fair enough. Its teachers often carried themselves like drill instructors, but Shepard was different. Quote, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to, Easton testified. He very much exuded that kind of authority, end quote. Easton remembered Shepard being fond of the phrase in loco parentis, the idea that, quote, we had absent fathers and he was trying to father us. In the privacy of his office, Shepard showed another side. Came with to take up the wooden paddle and discipline Easton with swats. There was something that passed for tenderness. Quote, this hurts me more than this hurts you, Easton remembers Shepard saying after one spanking. After another, Shepard told the grade 7 student to undress, but he didn't remember anything about that over in England. Quote, I remember I removed my pants and underwear, Easton recalled. You can't really say no to Shepard. There's Paul Shepard at St. John's. It was clear to both parties he would be returning to Canada. Nearly 30 years later, Shepard took a seat in the Wetaskiwin courtroom, crossed his arms over his three-piece gray suit. It was August 27, 2021, months after the jury had found him guilty of sexually abusing Stacey Easton. At St. John's in the early 1990s, Easton watched by video from their home in Hamilton. The Wetaskiwin courthouse was a far cry from grander places that Shepard had been in his career as an international educator. He sat on the bench. The 59-year-old might have recalled the halls of Bath Abbey, where he granted his doctorate in education, or the ballroom in Kuwait City, where he helped graduate the Gulf nation's brightest stars. He might have remembered the courtroom in England, where he wept his tears of relief as the jury acquitted him of molesting another former student. He might have drawn strength from people still in his corner, among them, former St. John's students and their influential fathers. Influential. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it was James Glenn he's crying over. Who knows? From 1956 to 2008, St. John's schools were a beacon for parents fed up with the public education system. The school administered corporal punishment with paddles known as SWAT sticks, taught an unapologetically back-to-basics curriculum, and led boys on snowshoe races and canoe trips of breathtaking intensity. Shepard spent 2 stints at St. John's, eventually rising to headmaster and leaving for good around 2002. 2 stints. Raised by an adoptive family in Niagara Falls, Shepard grew up at boarding schools and attending Ridley College. Are any of you familiar with Ridley College? I played a clip from the National Film Board movie, Secret Garden, I think it's called. It's quite an interesting watch. Ridley College is a very posh school. Upper Canada College. Very influential people come out of there. From age 10 to 18. Very expensive. He excelled in university, holds 5 advanced degrees, including 3 bachelor degrees from 3 different universities in 3 years. Again, read that. Including 3 bachelor degrees from 3 different universities in 3 years. Wow. Yes, yes. Yes. All during the COVID stuff. Okay, Shepard's international education career began in England. In 1989, Ampleforth College, Shepard was at the summer term science teacher, founded beside an old Benedictine abbey, Yorkshire. Ampleforth steeped in history. At the time of 1803's founding, the monks who came up with the first teaching staff were a decade removed from the exile in France, where they spent nearly 2 centuries, bookended by Tudor suppression of monasteries and the French Revolution. Ampleforth later became known as England's top private schools, earning the nickname the Catholic Eton. Some accelerated learning. Oh, yeah. More recently, Ampleforth is known to have a sexual abuse problem. In 2018, British independent inquiry into child sex abuse, which is an absolute gong show. It makes Nova Scotia inquiry, or whatever. No, what were they calling it? Omission. An absolute gong show, but it is similar in every way. The documents types, the questions, the having to go back and, pre-screen questions. And of course, this is taking place, 8 years? 8 years and 4 chairs and tens of thousands of abuse victims. Unbelievable. Right to the top. Politics, everything is tied up in there. And somehow Mr. Shepard is too. Ampleforth, the headmaster there, one point in time, early on, give me one moment. I'm just going to grab a pack of cigarettes. Was a person by the name of Basil Hume. Basil Hume became the head of the Catholic Church for England. Basil Hume also recommended Jimmy Savile to a very exclusive club. Ampleforth has a big problem. Boarding schools have a lot of problems. Boys' boarding schools, but they don't like anybody talking about that. The boys. ordered after revelations of late Jimmy Savile. Oh, there he is, see? Look at Basil Hume. You'll see what I'm talking about. Had been a serial child molester released in a report by Ampleforth Sister School Downside. The inquiry found that between 1995 and 2016, 5 Ampleforth employees were charged or cautioned for sexually abusing children. It's way, way worse than that. In some cases, school authorities never informed police of abuse allegations. 1989 summer semester. The inquiry concluded, quote, true scale of abuse at Ampleforth would likely never be known. Isn't it interesting how they always preface these things with that? You'll never know. Sound out of Nova Scotia? Same thing. You'll just never know. We'll never know. Stop asking. Sow the seed right there. Shepard was 26 when he arrived at Ampleforth. Speaking to the Daily Mail years later, students remember him as a charismatic, exciting teacher, entertaining them with claims about his time in the Royal Canadian Air Force. That June, however, a number of students from Ampleforth's junior house went to see the headmaster about Shepard, describing what the Times later would call physically over familiarity. They also used other terms. Father Dominic Milroy investigated the claims against Shepard, Ampleforth said in a statement, but the investigation ultimately, quote, did not yield allegations of sexual impropriety. I just proved that that was absolutely, definitively not true. Ampleforth lied in their statement. And Andrew Norfolk knows it. But of course, that's behind a paywall. Shepard left at the end of July 1989 when his supply contract ended. Untrue, the school said. The decision to leave was mutual. Untrue, given reference, 2 of them, paving his way for other teaching jobs. What teaching job would that be? Where did he go? Shepard denies anything untoward happened at Ampleforth. In response, he was found guilty of not the one boy. That's true. He was acquitted. I would just say there's a lot more there. Shepard denies anything untoward happened at Ampleforth. In response to an email seeking comment for the story, defense lawyer Brian Barish, he was the lawyer for the chief in northern Alberta. Remember the Great Village fight that happened? And the video that was out in the media, and the officer down in Great Village who got beat up. The chief up in Fort McMurray, his lawyer was Brian Barish. Brian Barish has some interesting clients. Said the complaints to the headmaster, quote, about Dr. Shepard's teaching and pastoral methods. There were no complaints about anything with a tinge of sexuality. The headmaster concluded the complaints arose from cultural differences. What cultural differences? I think there's a big cultural difference, huge cultural differences between Ridley College, say, and Ampleforth, Canada to the UK. We are a member of the Commonwealth, after all. Dr. Shepard was hired for one-term replacement of junior house science teacher. Is that so? And it was clear to both parties upon the expiration of the school term that he would be returning to Canada. I don't believe that's true. St. John's School of Alberta. St. John's modeled themselves on pamphlets used to return for Ernest Shackleton's Antarctica expeditions. Are you guys familiar with the St. John's schools? Ever heard of St. John's schools? Toughest schools in North America. Ted Byfield was up front. Enrolling a child in his school was not a fashionable choice. Quote, "You'll be told you're trying to set the clock back, that you're reactionary," end quote, the St. John's founder told 1968, gathering of prospective parents in Edmonton. Quote, "They're right, admit it. If the clock is wrong, you set it back." When Byfield spoke that winter day, quote, "child-centered," end quote, "progressivism was the dominant force in Canadian public education. The philosophy's high watermark in 1968 with the Hall-Dennis Report, a plan to reform Ontario schools, quote, "each and every child," end quote, its authors wrote, quote, "has the right to learn, play, and laugh, to dream, to love, to dissent, to reach upward, to be himself. Our children need to be treated as human beings, exquisite, complex, elegant in their diversity." Byfield believed that this outlook was a disaster for boys. Quote, "Normal male may live in a world win, lose, right, wrong, and true, false," he wrote in Today My Sail I Lift, 2012 History of St. John's Schools. Quote, "We were told years ago that these strictures must not be enforced through the use of violence because it will result in a violent world. So we abolished the stick and the strap, and we find ourselves living in society infinitely more violent than the one we set out to reform." Defended an Edmonton lawyer. I'm not familiar with that. I certainly know about he defended James. Forget his name. James, the hockey coach who was found guilty playing with Sheldon Kennedy and other hockey players. Brian Barish defended him. Byfield and co-founder Frank Weens met at Winnipeg's St. John's Anglican Cathedral in 1956. 1958, they launched St. John's as an outdoor-focused part-time school. 4 years later, they transformed an old Indian hospital near Selkirk, Manitoba, into a boarding school, which garnered international headlines for its tough outdoor programs and orthodox approach to education. An Alberta branch opened in 1968, followed by Ontario School in 1967. The Alberta School became St. John's after the others closed. Garrett James, is that his name? Thanks, Rage. I forgot his name. Located in the bend of the river southwest of Edmonton near Genesee, the Alberta School was outwardly idyllic. It had gardens, honey processing facilities, kennels for sled dogs. It appealed to parents whose sons weren't being challenged in the public school or had behavioral issues unsuited for the modern classroom. St. John's was a solution, writes author James Raffan in Deepwater in his book about the schools, for more conservative parents, or those who watched their children slide in permissiveness and individuality oriented in the classrooms of the 1970s. Now, is he going to talk about what that book is about? I don't think he does. Well, I'll tell you what that book is about. There's so many pieces to all this. But James Raffan's book that's being referred to here, Deep Waters, is about Canada's worst canoeing disaster. And very few people know of this. Does anybody know about worst canoeing accident in Canadian history? No? Maybe I'll flash something about that. Might as well get a few things on the table. One moment, please. Montreal Gazette. Canoes were blessed before boys were paddled to death. Claremont, Ontario, quote, save the skies that grow darker and yet the seas rise higher. That quotation hangs in the halls of St. John's Training School. Last night, ironic ring. On Saturday, the school held its open day. The Anglican ministers blessed in their four new 18-foot freighter canoes, party of 31 students and teachers that were to use for a 3-week expedition. 500 friends and relatives were on hand to bid the group goodbye in their wilderness trip. Last-minute instructions that were made, spoons and life jackets and hats at 8 a.m. Sunday. Parents and staff, St. John's, a private Anglican boarding school run by the Company of the Cross, drove the group across Lake Timnaskang, and I can never pronounce that properly. Pardon my terrible pronunciation, and returned the same day to Toronto. Within 24 hours, news came that 2 of the canoes, capable of carrying 8 passengers each, had been spotted upside down on the lake. Parents and brothers and sisters of students, the expedition crowded the former nursing home, which had been the school's quarters since last July. Assistant headmaster Mike Maunder called the parents together at 10 p.m. and told them he would know within the hour which boys had died in the tragedy in which students had survived. One of the mothers standing nearby moaned, "My God, it's like playing a game of roulette." The relatives, many of them weeping, openly stood in small groups, spoke about the passing agonizing minutes by chain smoking, drinking coffee, and hugging each other. One father rearranged the attacks on the school board to spell pray. Many parents took the advice and filled the school chapel. Chris Herman, whose brother Andy, 14, was on the trip. Andy's a good swimmer. We're just praying that he's safe. Andy was one of the dead. Robert Patterson of Toronto, whose son, Robert Jr., was also on the trip, said, thank God he's safe. His son was with the senior group. The tension mounted. Nervous relatives took anger in their out on journalists. Get out of here. So it was 13 people who died. St. John's School of Ontario, in 1978, 12 boys and 1 master died. And it's Canada's worst canoeing disaster. I think it may, in fact, be one of the worst canoeing disasters in the world. And yet it's hardly known. But these things have a way of doing that. And I could certainly get into all of that. And it's very, very tragic. And there was no... There was some very interesting things. I won't touch on that stuff. So let's not for now. But that is what is being referred to when James Raffan's book, because that's what it's about. Oh, I did this wrong again. How do I do this? There we go. Is that it? There we go. But it does have a fairly good kind of a synopsis of the schools. His book of the schools for more conservative parents who watch their children slide in permissive. Okay. Byfield rejected the, quote, let's learn together model of the modern classroom. In his view, the teacher-student relationship at St. John's was one of master and servant, quote unquote. To provide masters, St. John's created an Anglican lay order called the Company of the Cross, which initially offered staff just $1 a day plus room and board. $1. That was later raised to 10. Eventually, they did change that, but not until very recently. Like very recently, before the school's closure. So men, predominantly men, were going there to work for $1, $10 a day. And was not an easy school. Masters were to be addressed as sir and given latitude to spank boys for misbehavior. They were also encouraged to push boys the limit on their wilderness outings, sometimes with disastrous results. 1971, 15-year-old Marcus Janich died 22 miles into an inter-school snowshoe race at the Alberta school. 7 years later, 12 boys and master drowned in the Ontario school canoeing disaster. Other students suffered life-altering injuries, including one boy who lost 9 toes to frostbite in 1996 camping trip. There's a lot, but let's just leave it there. Shepard was something of an anomaly when he joined St. John's as a math and science teacher, December 1989. Where was he slightly before that? Ampleforth. Where did he take his letters of recommendation? From Ampleforth? From the headmaster? Glowing? To St. John's. Drama and choir were his passions, and some masters later accused him of watering down the outdoors program. Students recalled him showing up in surgical scrubs, other times sporting a Toronto police ball cap. At the time Shepard arrived, Alberta was in the best financial shape of the St. John schools. Ontario and Manitoba, which had long struggled to recruit staff and students, because you're paying them $1. Closed during its 1989-90 term. Memories of 1978 canoe disaster still lingered, while Manitoba had its own run of bad publicity. Just before the school closed, a visiting teacher was accused of molesting students in a school dorm. Today, my Sale I Lift states, Kenneth Mealy, assistant headmaster, was later convicted of sexually abusing 6 St. John's boys during the 1982-3 school year. Should I get into Ken Mealy? Because he's an interesting cat, too. It wasn't just Manitoba. Byfield last taught at St. John's in 1973. By then, he was focused on his magazine, the St. John's Edmonton Report, which then became what? Alberta Report, which then became Alberta Report, BC Report, Western Report, was actually published at the St. John's School near Genesee by the students. First printed presses at the Alberta School. The magazine, later renamed Alberta Report, became the leading supporter of the Reform Party, helping coin the slogan, quote, the West wants in, and quote, leavened its Western alienation with social conservatism, wondering 1993 cover story whether gays could be cured, quote unquote. Quote, the success of the magazine and Reform Party pointed to different kinds of culture in Alberta that helped the school fend off many years of societal forces that were building. The authors of Today My Sale I Lift wrote, Alberta was changing, but still close to its farm roots, being propelled forward by entrepreneurial spirit of Oilfield. It's embraced its traditional values of St. John's. Byfield died at the age of 93, December 23rd, 2021. Premier Jason Kenney remembered his friend as an, quote, old school journalist, an educator. Well, Ted Byfield had a lot of friends in the press and in politics. Byfield's son, Vince, who was elected to the United Conservative Party board as part of the anti-Kenney Take Back Alberta slate, doesn't recall his father mentioning Shepard, quote, even once. Now, I'm not going to touch the politics side of this stuff. I'm not. I'm just going to read it as it is. But to say, needless to say, there was a lot of connections, like a lot. A place that could smooth the edges off. St. John's aimed to turn boys into men, a fact Stacey Easton considers, quote, probably one of the most fundamental ironies in my life. And quote, Easton, 41-year-old writer and artist, is non-binary, uses they, them pronouns. He grew up in Fort Saskatchewan. They grew up in Fort Saskatchewan, where their small size and thick glasses made them a target for bullies. Easton's grandmother thought St. John's might help, put up the money for tuition, room, and board. She was, quote, she was worried I was too weird, perhaps too queer. Maybe this was the place that could smooth the edges off, Easton later wrote. I believe this is his Leaving Neverland article. For Slate magazine. Remember, He reported to police multiple times abuse that was happening at St. John's, and yet by Paul Shepard, and never could get anybody to listen. It's a very interesting article because he was talking about Michael Jackson. Anyway, where am I here? There we go. The end of Shepard's trial, Easton successfully applied to remove mandatory publication ban on their identity as sexual abuse complainant. 1993-94 school year began with a week-long new boy hike through the Rocky Mountains. Easton, then 12, had little outdoors experience and was branded as a weakling. The bullying got worse when they returned to St. John's. Claiming he wanted to address the hygiene problems that made Easton a target, Shepard began to supervise Easton during group showers. Easton also recalls being singled out for discipline in the duty master's room, the office where the rotating dorm supervisor slept. I remember him saying that spanking me was a way of teaching me of instilling self-discipline, Easton later testified, and that there were other ways of teaching me. Easton recalls that Shepard spanking them 34 times, 10 times more than any other teacher that year. He really loved to spank people, Easton testified. 10 or 12 spankings involved sexual touching. Easton had once been terrified of Shepard, but now different emotion reigned. I was confused, Easton recalled. It was difficult for me to be in that school. I was physically assaulted and then isolated and verbally abused by other teachers and other students. So at that moment, I felt like I wanted to, he wanted to take care of me. The title "Toughest School of North America" comes from an actual article which was written on the schools, and it's a very interesting read. Of course, it's gone, but you know, things in the press disappear. I have it. I don't know if I should read it, but to understand, I don't think people can understand the people think boarding schools are boarding schools, right? And that's what usually comes to people's minds. A prep school, very, you know, snobby, and that might not be quite what St. John's was about. At all. It was a different type of school. I was confused, Easton recalled. It was really difficult for me to be in that school. I was physically assaulted. Shepard left St. John's at the end of 93-94. After receiving an offer to teach in the Dominican Republic. After 4 years abroad, he returned to St. John's in 1998 as assistant headmaster, rising to headmaster. Okay, so just so we got it, I hope that I've got the running chronological stuff going right here, right? So we have all the stuff that's going on in Ampleforth, right? They know without a doubt what was going down there. Milroy said to the police, the headmaster, that he gave him letters, sent him off to St. John's. St. John's had him for 5 years. And then he left to ostensibly go to the Dominican Republic. Ostensibly. And then came back 4 years later with a promotion to assistant headmaster. And then 2 years later was promoted to headmaster, only to leave 2 years later. South Korea, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Cameroon, Congo, Korea, China, multiple schools, Canada, obviously, in Alberta, England, seeing something strange? Shepard ran at least 3 international schools after leaving St. John's for the second time in 2002. By 2009, he was head of the Sun Tzu Singapore International School. In 2012, a Congolese newscast identified him as a director of the American International School of Brazzaville. I have some video of that. I have a lot of stuff. The same year, he was quoted in a Cameroonian newspaper as director of the American School of Yaoundé. He later served as the director of Al Bayan Bilingual School, appearing in the pages of Times Kuwaiti Times, full academic regalia. Nice, yes. Easton left St. John's after grade 8. They spent most of grade 9 being treated for mental health issues at Glen Rose Rehabilitation Hospital. I don't say this to pick on Easton in any way, shape, or form. So think about this. He goes to a school for 2 years and he comes back. Why is this thing here? He comes back and he is hospitalized for mental health issues for his grade 9 year, or a good chunk of it. One would think that maybe something was not going on well at the school. Where doctors first diagnosed them with autism, eventually they completed a GED, enrolled in the University of Alberta, where their writing career began with the bylines in the Gateway. 2002, Easton sent Shepard an email and later met him for coffee, although neither remembered much about the meeting. Quote, "I was afraid that after St. John's, you would think of me as a screw-up," end quote. Easton wrote to Shepard. "It's hard to put in words, but you played an important part in my life. I wasn't sure who I wanted to be, and I am not sure the way that you dealt with me helped. I am not sure you knew how to help." Those words are, there's a lot there. An arrest at Heathrow. When Shepard stepped off the flight in Kuwait during 2014 Christmas season, police were waiting at London's Heathrow Airport. Shepard was charged with 4 counts of indecent assault dating to his time at Ampleforth. The counts involved 3 former Ampleforth pupils who came forward After another alumni died by suicide in 2013, the man's family claimed that before his death, claimed? Claimed? The man's death the man's family claimed that before his death, the 35-year-old had said that Shepard had sexually abused him during his brief stint at the school. Coroner's report concluded the former pupil had a history of mental health and addiction issues that made no finding why he killed himself. This is a pattern. The seedy underside of the belly of what happens to boys when they are abused. This video may get me in a lot of trouble, but this is something that they never want anybody to talk about. I know that. Boys. When a boy is abused, it does very bad things to a boy's mind. Very bad. And, it's not to take away anything from girls, but it would be my opinion. And I think it's fairly well founded. If you look at things to do with the church and stuff like that, yes, everybody knows that the church has a problem. Say the Roman Catholic Church has a problem, right? Quite a very serious problem, which they don't want to look at or admit. But the media quite often will go and find girls who are victimized, but the vast majority, and I know that the Roman Catholic Church has their studies, but the honest to God truth is that the problem resides with boys, right? And they will get, the media will, I remember I was watching a newscast not that long ago of an archdiocese where, down in the States, I can't remember which one it was, and they had 8 victims on stage. 7 of them were girls. That narrative is the one that they want people, they don't want to talk about, obviously, children at all, right? I think most people can see that. But if they're going to talk about it, they're going to say girls. That's what they want people. They want to stay away from this one. And a lot of boys go to boarding schools and bad things happen there and does bad things to their minds. And, I'm not trying to sound tinfoily. It makes them very malleable. Yes. Yes, it's a biological thing, right? I don't want to be vulgar, but that is true. And this is why it does very screwy things. Well, men are perps. That's just simply true. But the boys are victims, and they are silent victims, and they're full of shame, way more shame, because you're not a man anymore. I need to go to bed. Okay, God bless you. All right. God bless you. Have a good sleep. Yes, deflection. Exactly, deflection. You have a good sleep, Derek. But if you look at what happens to boys that are abused, you're going to find there is sadly a pattern of alcohol, drugs, Violence, a lot of violence with some boys. Criminality, off the charts with some boys. Some boys become very they lose their, I don't know how you put that. Maybe somebody can help me with a word. So I'm trying to be sensitive. I don't want to misspeak. Maybe they lose their manliness. Is that they become more submissive. Submissive? They become abusers themselves in a lot of cases, which is really, really sad, because that's something that they understand. They become affectionate towards their abusers, right? There's a lot of things that happen to boys. And of course, where do a lot of powerful people come from? Boarding schools, right? But made no findings about why he had his issue and he died. I don't think it's too hard to put two and two together, right? If you want to be totally non-tinfoily, you could go elsewhere with that, but I won't. The complainants who made allegations against Shepard were 11 or 12 at the time of the alleged abuse. One claimed that Shepard touched his genitals while spanking his bare bottom pattern. Another claimed that Shepard held him down, straddled him, punishment run. Third claims to have seen Shepard kiss and stroking a sleeping boy. Pre-trial rulings by Judge Colin Byrne resulted in just 2 counts involving one complainant to go ahead after the defense successfully argued that the alleged conduct of 2 counts fell short of the legal definition of indecency. And of course, the other 2 were just told not to show up. By the time the trial began in 2015, just 2 counts remained, involving one student who claimed to have been indecently touched or spanking during spanking. There's some quotations from this boy. I think I may have read that. Who's like, I'm alone. Here I am. I thought there were going to be, the others who came forward, and I show up and it's just me. Like, how mortifying would that have been? To have to carry around all this guilt and shame and all of this other stuff coming from the families that they come from, right? And, because there's obviously stuff associated to that. To be successful business people, to which these people were, and then finding out you're all alone, standing up there saying, oh yeah, something happened to me. Shepard denied the charges. He said he did not specifically remember spanking the complainant, but added he would never ask a student to remove their pants or underwear. The prosecution was dealt another blow when, under cross-examination, the complainant conceded that one of the acts might have been an accident. Not sure how that quite happens, right? Just thinking of anatomy, but Shepard's defense argued that there was had no case, and the charge should be tossed. Byrne agreed, rather than allowing the jury to decide for itself for the alleged conduct. the incident, as the Crown suggested, Shepard was acquitted on the one remaining count. So it just gets whittled down. And yet there are still other boys who came forward too. Where are those? Who knows? And the very police force who was handling this, North Yorkshire, is quote unquote bungled it. Not that I believe that at all. A lot of powerful people. Shepard's accuser, who spent who is expected to be part of the larger prosecution, said he was stunned. Quote, I was told I mustn't make any reference to other complaints. I was not allowed to say why Shepard suddenly vanished from the school. Everybody knew, he said in the Times interview. It was so frustrating because it must have looked to the jury like I was jumping on the Jimmy Savile bandwagon. Funnily enough, though, who kind of came out? Anyway. James Glynn. Sob story. 3 years after his trial in England, Michael DeLanga reconnected with his former classmate Paul Shepard over lunch at Niagara Falls. It was DeLanga's first time seeing Shepard since the 80s, when the two attended Loretto High School. He remembered Shepard as a jokester and older brother figure. He always was giving advice about one thing or another. By all appearances, Shepard was now a successful international educator with a BMW and stories of his time abroad. DeLanga had not seen the headlines about Ampleforth and felt his stomach drop when Shepard turned the conversation to England. Quote, he basically tells me this sob story, DeLanga said. He claimed that Shepard dismissed the allegations as kids put up by somebody to make a buck or two for themselves. They're going to trash their name. The shreds of manhood that are left, not that they're not any less than. Nobody, no boy comes forward in their right mind and makes a phony claim. That takes a lot to make a dollar. Really? These people come from families that have no need. Their grandkids have money. It's all good in the hood. They're only doing it because they know there's really serious problems and it has to stop. So here you see that Michael DeLanga says that he attended with Shepard at Loretto High School. Shepard went to Ridley College until he was 18. Does that mean that he then went over to Loretto? So again, this is not something that is quite when you are an old boy at a boarding school, you don't leave. You've already been run through the system. If you've made it that far, that is like the grand prize, is your final year. Why did Shepard leave Loretto? He has a habit of leaving things, I'm seeing. In DeLanga's view, he showed, quote, zero guilt, zero culpability. Shepard disputes DeLanga's recollection of the conversation. Shepard disputes DeLanga's recollection. Quote, Dr. Shepard never used the expression make a buck. Barish wrote, oh, that's not Shepard disputing. That's a written statement issued by his lawyer. There's a big difference. It's not as though Shepard has ever sat down and had a discussion with anybody. His lawyer will speak for him, Brian Barish in this case. During his discussion, Dr. Shepard pondered out loud to Mr. DeLanga, and he wondered what motivated the students to make false allegations. For Stacey Easton, now living in Hamilton, the news from England was a turning point. Easton had tried reporting Shepard as far back as 1999, but for various reasons, the process went nowhere. We can make this official, Easton remembers thinking. We can prevent him from teaching. We can have consequences for his behavior. Remember how much teaching he did after this all. And it could have stopped many, many times along the way. And I'm not getting into some things here. And yet this was decades of his teaching. How many victims do you think potentially there are across the world? It's hard to grasp, but if you look back at a summer, that'll give you an idea. Then you can do the math. Potentially. February 23rd, 2017, Easton contacted Alberta RCMP. So 18 years he's on this road trying to get some justice, who arranged for Hamilton police to take statement. More than 2 years later, October 5th, 2019, Shepard was arrested near his home in St. Catharines, Ontario, and charged with sexual interference, sexual assault, invitation to sexual touching. RCMP have no record of any press release announcing the arrest. Interesting. Popularity contest. When Shepard's trial began in March 2021, Barish insisted Easton was, quote, simply mistaken, end quote, about what happened. He claimed Shepard recorded all instances of corporal punishment in the official St. John's logbook, which was a blow to the defense. Which, in a blow to the defense, did not survive the school's closure. Okay. Barish described Easton's testimony as, quote, smart aleck. That's nice. Suggested any discipline was justified because Easton couldn't follow the rules, and argued that, quote, only a fool, end quote, would abuse a student in an office in the middle of a busy dorm. Barish also repeatedly called Easton he and sir, despite warnings from the court. Yeah, not nice behavior. But fluster the witness, right? And make him look poor. Just demolish the complainant. Among the defense's most significant pieces of evidence was Easton's 2002 email to Shepard. The fact that it contained no direct allegation is a magic bullet, quote unquote. Barish claimed it nice complimentary email. There isn't a harsh word. Oh, but I think doesn't, like he says, I don't know if you helped, what you did. I just know it changed a lot of things in my life. Just because he's not saying something, it takes a lot. Anyway, Easton saw the attempts to contact Shepard as more complicated. I wanted to be successful to the person who did the damage to me, they told the jury. Can you follow the reasoning? You're in a school. Again, I'd have to go through the school for people to understand what exactly that was about, because it was not a prep school in any way, shape, or form, not even remotely close. It was there's literally a book. There is a book called The Toughest School of North America. These schools were extremely hard, very, very demanding, a lot of discipline, like lots. The idea of the school was to tear a student down to his very core. You absolutely, until you have nothing. And then you tear them down more. And then you rebuild them the way that you want them. So when you're in an atmosphere like that, and again, I won't get into details about that at this point. When you're in an atmosphere like that, and you have somebody who comes along and is nice to you, do you see how that works? In both of his trials, Shepard was bolstered by former St. John's parents, two of whom made their careers in Alberta justice. Alan Fradsham, a provincial court judge, gave character evidence in defense UK trial and submitted a letter of support after his Alberta conviction. Post-conviction. Obviously, he didn't understand, the first time around, using his title as judge over in England in 2015. Now he's actually getting convicted in 2021, convicted, and he's asking for leniency as a provincial court judge on his friend. Sounds like a boot camp. Oh. Retired RCMP Superintendent David Asp, meanwhile, told jurors that Shepard was a, quote, great mentor to his son and a lifelong family friend. Superintendent of the RCMP. Do you see? Whose son also went to the school. For Crown Prosecutor Drew Gillespie, Shepard's defense was a popularity contest. In the eyes of supporters, Shepard was a great fatherly teacher who even a Mountie trusted to invite to his home. Stacey Easton was an outcast. Quote, the Crown's theory is they were targeted for that very reason, Gillespie said. Corporal punishment provided the opportunity. Corporal punishment seems very much part of the MO. The spanking. Who was it? Somebody put that in here? Let me see. I'll go back and find your guys' comment because I saw that. Hello, remote viewer. Right there. Yeah, remote viewer said it. Oh, very much so. That's part of it. It is. Who wins the popularity contest? Gillespie asked the jurors. Not Stacey Easton. But this isn't a popularity contest. Even when jurors returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, many of the St. John's community stood by Shepard. 8 of his 15 letters of support came from alumni, parents, and former staff. 8. 15 letters. 15 letters. Round 2. What? Superintendent? Judge? A former assistant said Shepard's only fault was, quote, too caring, which at times can be taken advantage of, end quote. A former student remembered Shepard being comforting him when he felt alone. Fradsham believes Shepard's, quote, fundamental positive attributes better define him than sex offenses against Easton. The letters did little to influence Deborah Youngworth, Justice Deborah Youngworth, who noted, people who molest children often do so to the surprise of those who they thought knew them. Shortly after Shepard took his seat at the Wetaskiwin that August day, she sentenced him to 6 years in prison. Shepard quickly appealed, claiming Youngworth hampered the defense by not disclosing Easton's therapy records. Why is he in therapy? A 3-judge Court of Appeal panel heard the case October 7th. It is yet to deliver a decision. Shepard remains out on bail. Now, England is not really admissible because the one charge he was acquitted of. But what about all the other ones there? What about his time at St. John's? Curious. What about all the other schools? Legacies. More than 5,000 boys had passed through the St. John's system by the time the Alberta school closed in 2008. A lot of boys. For some, it was an adventure of a lifetime. One that pulled them from delinquency and set them on a path for success. Not all the children that went there were quote unquote delinquents. I mean, Easton obviously is not a delinquent. He was being bullied. A lot of the kids that went there were not delinquents. This was not like a place that people were sent to by the court system. Parents paid a lot of money. These kids came from affluent homes. Others, like Frank Ween's son, Rick, remembered the experience as a long sojourn in hell, quote unquote. Quote, its mold was one size fits all, singularly lacking in imagination or even the simple recognition that boys are different and what is simple for one can be absolutely soul-destroying for another. Frank Weens wrote in 1999, some boys flourished, and I say good for them. Some died a little each day. His article is really powerful. St. John's sold its Riverside campus to an Indigenous charter school a few years after it closed. It lives on through its charitable arm, the St. John's School of Alberta Legacy Foundation, which funds scholarships as well as donations to charities to support education and, quote, advance religious tenets, doctrines, observance according to the associated with the Christian faith. The organization reported $4.3 million in assets last year. President David Hunt did not respond to requests for comments on Shepard's conviction, nor did Peter Jackson, the school's final headmaster, who formally dissolved the Alberta Company of the Cross 1 month after Shepard's sentencing. Interesting timing. None of the international schools in which Shepard worked for responded to requests for comment either. For Stacey Easton, St. John's made the abuse Shepard inflicted possible. In Easton's view, the Shepard had no idea what to do with a queer kid with autism, so it resorted, as it so often did, to the SWAT stick. Quote, those who were in power thought that hitting children would make those children into good men, end quote. Easton wrote, quote, the school believed violence would bring us together, end quote. St. John's kept some form of corporal punishment throughout the early 2000s, shortly before the Supreme Court of Canada banned the practice in the schools. I wonder if they ever had difficulties with the court system and abuse, any other occasions. Easton has very mixed feelings about coming forward. Shepard once strode the halls of St. John's with such authority, now looked sad and exhausted. If Easton had their way, the trial would have ended with the jury's verdict, the simple acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done. In the impact statements, Easton reflected on the limits of restorative justice and the violence Shepard might face in prison. It seemed too familiar to how the old school would have handled things. Quote, St. John's believed deeply in the idea of violent correction, Easton said, as Shepard listened in the gallery. Quote, I reject those lessons and think that sending Dr. Shepard to prison will reinforce the legitimacy of them. To reject these lessons is to reclaim myself as forcefully as I know how from the damage that has been done to me. I want to unlearn the lessons of St. John's. Now, that's not the end of the saga. Shepard appealed it to the Alberta Court of Appeal, three-judge panel. They upheld the original decision. Shepard then appealed it to the Supreme Court of Canada. Barish, very good lawyer, very expensive. Supreme Court of Canada said, we will not hear your case. He then appealed the sentence of 6 years. All that time remaining out on bail. Years. What happened then? One moment. Appeal court substantially reduces sentence for former Alberta boys' school teacher who sexually abused student. December 22nd, 2023. Alberta's top court has shaved 2 years off the sentence of former Alberta boys' school headmaster who sexually abused a student there 3 decades ago. Well, he was the teacher then. But the decision by the 3-court judge panel was not unanimous, with a dissenting judge accusing the majority of trading in myths and stereotypes about sexual abuse victims. Paul Shepard is serving prison sentence for for sexually abusing Stacey Easton, a student at St. John's School of Alberta, 93-94 school year. A jury convicted Shepard 60 of sexual interference, invitation to sexual touching in early 2021 trial with Tasquin. Court of King's Bench, Deborah Youngsworth, sentenced Shepard to 6 years in prison, finding the Crown had proven 10 to 12 instances of sexual touching occurred over the course of the school year. Court of Appeal Justice Thomas Wakeling, however, concluded Youngworth made legal errors in reaching that decision, joined in the majority by Justice Kevin Feehan. Wakeling concluded that the sentence was demonstrably unfit because Youngworth failed to properly lay out the crimes which she was sentenced Shepard, or explaining how she arrived at the 10 to 12 number. Wakeling said Youngworth ought to have concluded that there was just one instance of each offense. It is only safe way to rely on the facts that are essential in the conviction for one count of sexual interference. The offender touched the victim's penis once, and one count of sexual invitation. The offender invited the victim to touch the offender's penis once. Brian Barris, Shepard's lawyer, said he's, quote, very pleased with the decision. Quote, it substantially reduces the sentence and has provided some clear direction for trial judges in the future. Easton was unhappy with the outcome despite complicated feelings about sending Shepard to prison. Complicated. He's very conflicted. Easton, who uses they, them pronouns, was nonetheless heartened by Justice Michelle Crichton's dissent, which accused her colleagues of inappropriately relitigating Easton's credibility. Quote, I was really reassured, Easton said. The dissenting judge said, we have this argument and you, Shepard, have lost repeatedly. St. John's was once of 3 defunct, okay. Easton came forward in 2017. Shepard launched multiple appeals after being found guilty and was granted bail while these cases were decided. I don't believe he ever had to reapply for bail. This is not something I'm familiar with. He was granted bail in continuance of the exhaustion of his appeals. Perhaps somebody can help me with that, but legally, I'm not familiar with that. Very interesting. There's a lot of interesting things legally going on with Mr. Shepard, Dr. Shepard. Finding facts, there's a lot of interesting things. And I'm just kind of trying to run through basically a surmise of it, because it gets extremely complicated. And I will get into and go some really crazy places. And I will go there. But I want to kind of lay out some of the facts here. Finding facts, Wakeling's decision hinged on how Judge Youngsworth determined the facts behind the jury's guilty verdicts. In Canada, the jury deliberate in secret and are forbidden from disclosing any details from their discussions. They are released after reaching a verdict, with sentencing left entirely to judges. Judges may decide what facts the jury would have found to reach each guilty verdict. In some cases where single count cover multiple alleged offenses, judges must decide how many of the offenses were actually proven, which affects the length and type of the sentence. In Shepard's case, Youngworth had to decide whether there was one instance of each of sexual interference and invitation to sexual touching, the bare minimum required for the conviction, or as many as 12, meaning that a jury completely believed Easton. Okay, so we know that there were 3 charges that he was found guilty of by a jury, right? Sexual interference, sexual touching, and forget the third. But he, in fact, had one charge removed in this appeal process, sentencing appeal process. Not only did they condense this down, but they also removed one of the charges that the jury found him guilty of. A jury of his peers. Judges came in and changed that. Wakeling said Youngworth did not properly grapple with what he viewed as problems with Easton's testimony and faulted her failing on how she concluded that there were approximately 10 instances of sexual violence. He noted Easton confessed to having a, quote, bad memory. That's also very normal, especially when you're getting physically, sexually, psychologically abused. Lots of people have bad memories around that, like really bad. When it came to St. John's, but confidently, he recalled 34 instances being spanked by Shepard. Wakeling also took issue with Easton's claim that most of the abuse occurred in the duty master's office, a room in the heart of a busy dorm with little privacy. Yes, lots of boys running around screaming, or times that they weren't. It doesn't mean anything. Wakeling ultimately concluded 6-year sentence was too harsh. He cited an expert's report that found Shepard posed low likelihood to reoffend. Again, I'm just giving you what's here. I got lots more. Adding that he has not been convicted of any crime in the... okay. He has not been convicted of any crime in the ensuing 30 years. Could somebody help me with the definition? Yes, Albert de Villiers. Yes. There's another absolutely tragic. And there's more to that story too. Okay, so ensuing. What is the definition of ensuing? Does that mean after? It does not say he has not been convicted of any crime, period. Right? It says in the ensuing 30 years. So anything after when the offense took place, 93, 94. What about before? This incontrovertible evidence of his law-abiding behavior in the period following the end of the 93-94 school year. Are you seeing something? Does that make you want to ask a question? Following. What about before? Wakeling also argued Youngworth should have given more consideration to the 15 letters of support, including a provincial court judge, round 2, submitted on Shepard's behalf, including a letter from provincial court Justice Alan Fradsham, whose son attended St. John's. Well, it's not just his son. He sent his other son there too. 2 of them. But I digress for now. We won't go anymore. Troubling myths and stereotypes. Crichton, the dissenting judge, argued Wakeling was improperly inserting his own opinions into Easton's credibility under the guise of criticizing the judge's decision. The question of Easton's credibility, she said, is not open for debate. The appellant, Shepard, defended on the basis that none of the events the complainant testified to happened. Whatever else the jury may have found, the jury did not believe the appellant and accepted the complainant was credible in relation to the essential elements of the offense charged. She said Wakeling had also engaged with, quote, some troubling myths and stereotypes, including that the complainant, who was 40 years old at trial, did not accuse the appellant sooner, continued to have contact with the appellant, and at times spoke to the positive influence the appellant may have had on their old life. We know that he went in 1999. So that's 5 years after was when he started. I mean, what kind of limit do you want to have? Doesn't matter. It happened to him. Clearly, because a jury found him guilty. And why they're removing the one charge? Not exactly sure. From what I infer that Wakeling considers the offenses to have not only been less impactful as a result, but also the complainant's reliability is thereby lacking. This, too, is wrong in law. Youngworth also right to place little weight on the character reference and report like Shepard's likelihood to reoffend, Crichton said. The letters provided to me do not attest to remorse, nor any attempts to reform or treatment. Moreover, while the report opines as to the appellant's low risk to reoffend, it does so without regard to these offenses. Excellent. These points are totally true. I don't know how many you guys have reviewed cases like this, but this is like a pattern. The letters, the support, it's the same thing. Rinse, repeat, always with people who want to offend against boys. I'm not so familiar with the girls part, but I certainly will say this is very, very common to some very sad results. Wakeling and Feehan reduced Shepard's sentence to 47 months. A spokesperson for the Alberta Crown Prosecutor says it's reviewing whether to appeal the decision to the Supreme Court. Maybe something might surface that could change this, because it's not right. I understand that that's what Easton wants, but I suspect that there are a lot of other boys out there. I suspect, and that this may just open the floodgates, not just here, but a lot of different places. And then you start going back to who could have stopped it and when. So Millie Woods, I don't think these judges fully appreciate what it's like to be cornered by somebody in authority and touched against your will. It's not nice, depending on the circumstances, can cause tremendous anguish. Speaking from experience. True. But you know what? In this case, it's exactly the opposite, funnily enough. It is somebody who comes to you in an atmosphere. Maybe I should read that article. I don't think I should keep the stream going terribly longer because it's getting pretty late. But I will read that article. What St. John's is not a a school that many could even begin to comprehend. So if you're in an atmosphere, and feel free to read up on some of it, leave me your comments about what you come across. When you're in an atmosphere where, like Easton is feeling very alone and he can't leave and he's threatened, and he's not just threatened, he's taking a lot of violence on all ends, and somebody says they're going to kind of be nice to him, that is appealing. I agree with the dissenting judge. Letters of support about today from people who are sexually assaulted by this man. In line of work, I have worked with many people who are sexually assaulted, never reported abuse. Okay, so I think for today, I'm going to shut down the stream. But this story has international implications, and there are a lot of people tied up into it, right? I mean, we know that an RCMP, who then became an RCMP superintendent, was a parent at the time, who was friends with him. We have a judge, a provincial court judge, who has come to his defense twice, even though he is convicted. A really stinky trial over in England. You have schools, at least 7 different countries, and sometimes I think multiple schools in, say, China, 4 continents, and 20, 30 years? A lot of victims, potentially. Anyway, I do hope that you guys are doing well. It's been a long time, and yeah, we'll get a little heavier into this story. I would appreciate any research that people do. I know quite a bit, but you are all very good and may come up with some stuff I don't know. And I'd say in my, maybe there's one other thing. I'll just to one other little article I'll read. Let's see if I can find that. I don't know if I can though. I don't know what I saved it under. Oh, right. Okay. So this is a bit of an odd article. But it'll give you an idea. Okay. There's a new screen. Okay. Winnipeg Free Press. Shamed priest awaits his fate. 2001, June 28th. Victims' statements recall assaults in the 70s. An Anglican priest who fondled 3 young boys while working at a Winnipeg parish in the 1970s will learn the price of his sins tomorrow when a judge decides his sentence. James Townley Smith, 62, committed the most fundamental breach of trust, quote unquote, when he attacked the victims, now grown men, while working at St. George's Anglican Church in Trescona. Crown Attorney Sheena Linebird said yesterday at sentencing hearing. Okay. She asked for a prison term between 3 to 5 years. He worked his way into the hearts and souls and spirits of parishioners and the community. Quote, once he had their trust and respect, he invaded their lives forever. Defense lawyer Sandy Chapman asked for a conditional sentence that would allow her client, now a Toronto resident, to remain free. This article is not fucking around. It's gloopy, man. She said Townley Smith is now a married man who has worked hard to rebuild his shattered reputation. He has not worked in the church since 1998 arrest. Okay. Queen's Bench Justice Nathan Nergitz will deliver his decision tomorrow. One of Townley Smith's victims sat silently in court yesterday as lawyers argued their case. The 38-year-old man, who now works as a sexual abuse counselor, that's another common one, men who go on to sexual abuse counseling, who came forward to police 3 years ago after his pleas to the Anglican Church fell on deaf ears, court was told. The man said he approached the Anglican bishop and asked him to take action. He was told, quote, churches have a large carpet to sweep things under, end quote. Oh, the bishop said that? Okay. Linebird said, both the man and his younger brother were abused by Townley Smith when he visited their homes on numerous occasions. The man's brother, who suffers from cerebral palsy, was recovering from surgery when Townley Smith began fondling his penis as he sat in his wheelchair. Linebird said. And I'm familiar with more of the story, so I'll tell you that the cerebral palsy boy was in a wheelchair, apparently with 2 casts on, and cerebral palsy, and he's being fondled. Not sure quite how he's supposed to get away from that, but it gets more seedy. Townley Smith had set his sights then on the 8-year-old boy when his 11-year-old brother began making excuses to get out of the house every time he would come and visit, she said. The boy's mother caught Townley Smith touching her children and eventually told him he was no longer welcome in their home. You stop that. The mother of Townley Smith's 3rd victim also caught him fondling her son, then 11, and ordered Townley Smith out of her home, Linebird said. The woman complained to a senior Anglican priest, Charles Griggs. Griggs promised to deal with the matter internally, but no action was taken. Earlier this year, Griggs, 72, pleaded guilty to sexually abusing 10 boys between 1965 and 86. Wonder why he didn't deal with that. Townley Smith moved to Toronto in the mid-70s. Maybe I'll just read the entirety of the article and I'll add some details that I know. Townley Smith moved to Toronto in the mid-70s and was charged in 1980 with abusing 4 young Ontario boys. He was convicted of gross indecency and was sentenced to 3 years of probation. But he still worked for the church until 1998, 18 years later. But we're still going. A psychologist diagnosed Townley Smith as, quote, being a, quote, homosexual pedophile, end quote. I'm reading the quote directly. Then married him in 1983. Court was told. Are you following this? He was charged and convicted, and the pre-sentencing report was done by this psychologist who diagnosed him as, quote, a homosexual pedophile, and she then married him. Okay, waiting. Court was told 2 of her glowing reports were submitted to the court, in this case, in 2001. Do you see something severely wrong? A woman, a psychologist, diagnoses a convicted pedophile as being a homosexual pedophile for his pre-sentencing report in 1980. Then she decides to marry him. I'm not understanding how that works out. I'm trying to think of how that marriage works. Why she would marry him. He's a pedophile. He's a homosexual pedophile, in her own words. Then she marries him. Then he gets convicted again, and she writes 2 glowing reports as a psychologist on behalf of her husband. Convicted round 2. Playing with cerebral palsy boys in wheelchairs with casts on. And she's still married to him. At least as of this article. And obviously supports him. And I don't even know why the court would even take the reports. The other details to this story are that Griggs and Townley Smith, well, they ran a camp in Ontario together. They also worked in parishes together. Ran a camp for boys in Kenora, Ontario. God only knows what was going down there. And guess what? Townley Smith, he worked at St. John's. 2 years at the St. John's Manitoba School. This stuff, there's a lot. And it needs to be talked about. Time for, pretending that doesn't exist and all this other stuff. It's terrible. It absolutely does unbelievable amounts of damage to not just the victim, the victim's friends and loved ones, their relationships, their families, the shame that everybody carries in every single one of these stories. And the fact that men make it through, many of them do not. Suicide is very common. Very, very common. Another issue that nobody is really looking at. 80% of suicides are committed, are done by males. 80%. The number one leading cause of males under 30, how old is it? 37 in Europe. I think it's Europe, or it might be worldwide statistic. I'm not sure. Is suicide. Not car accidents or cancers or heart attacks or anything. It's suicide. Why are so many men committing suicide? Because there's a lot of men out there who have been abused, like huge numbers. They just are afraid of being judged. And society needs to stop burying them. I know why they're being buried. The people in power, a lot of them are frankly the same thing. They've got their own shame. Some of them are horrendous individuals abusing other kids too. It's a horrific, horrific thing. Anyway, 3 hours. And it's a start. I do appreciate you guys joining me. And yeah. Say a prayer. There's a lot of men and young boys out there that are, and not just them, it's everybody in their lives that are hurting. And say a prayer for those who haven't made it. God bless you. God bless them.